You think we need you? Commander Dane Voss's voice cut through the chamber like a serrated blade, cold, sharp, final. He stood at the heart of the Galactic Council Assembly, where over 300 alien species ruled the stars with smug arrogance. The ceiling loomed high, curved like the rib cage of a beast, the walls embedded with pulsating bioluminescent veins. It smelled of wet stone and synthetic sterility, a place devoid of life, yet desperate to command it. The murmurs of representatives, diplomats, and warlords died in their throats as they stared at the human before them. "We made you powerful," snarled Chancellor Keth Volzar, his scaled lips curling. "Your ships rely on our hyperlanes. Your colonies thrive on our trade. Your fleets are nothing but scavenged remnants of better civilizations." His words slithered through the chamber, smug and unchallenged. He believed them. Voss didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled, a slow, knowing grin, like a wolf watching a sheep lecture it on survival. "You misunderstand." He took a step forward, boots clicking against the council's polished obsidian floor. "Earth never needed you. You needed us." The silence that followed felt thick enough to choke on. Voss studied them, the self-proclaimed rulers of the galaxy, the architects of a system designed to keep Earth under their thumb. He saw the twitching mandibles, the flickering biolenses, the uneasy glances exchanged like static charges before a storm. They were afraid. They just didn't know why yet. Across the chamber, Ambassador Tovin Rix, a delegate from the Sarvaxi Dominion, a species that resembled feathered serpents, hissed in amusement. "Another human bluff," he mused, his plumes vibrating with dry laughter. "You would collapse without our infrastructure. What will you do? Grow crops in your little solar system? Trade among yourselves like primitive apes?" Laughter rippled through the assembly. Voss rolled his shoulders. They were going to learn today. He lifted his wrist and tapped a single command into the device embedded beneath his sleeve. The chamber plunged into darkness. The bioluminescent veins along the walls flickered and died. The towering displays that once showed galactic trade routes, economic charts, security monitoring feeds, all turned to static. A ripple of unease slithered through the room. Then every human delegate in the chamber disappeared. Gasps erupted. Volzar lurched forward, his bony knuckles tightening on the ceremonial podium. "What is this?" His voice carried a thread of uncertainty, now jagged and unsteady. From the shadows, Voss answered, "This is the sound of your leash snapping." The chamber's emergency lighting activated, bathing the room in a sickly crimson glow. Aides scrambled at malfunctioning control panels, diplomats barked panicked orders, and security personnel fumbled with weapons that had suddenly lost connection to their targeting systems. A single alert echoed across the council's internal network: "Connection lost, human colonies. Connection lost, Earth fleet. Connection lost, all human affiliates." The council's greatest intelligence officers, some who had orchestrated the downfall of empires, stared in shock at screens that displayed nothing but error messages. Earth was gone. Voss watched the horror bloom across Volzar's face, watched the Chancellor's confidence drain away like coolant from a breached reactor. He wasn't done yet. A final transmission, originating from nowhere and everywhere, broadcasted across every council-linked station, relay and fleet. Voss's voice, crisp and unyielding, carried through the stars. "The era of Earth's submission is over. You are nothing without us. Now you will learn just how much you depended on the very species you sought to chain." He paused, letting the words sink in, letting the universe shift. "This is not a war. This is a departure." And then the humans vanished. Chancellor Volzar's claws dug into the console in front of him, the thick keratin groaning under the pressure of his grip. "Restore communications," he bellowed, his throat flaring with frustration. The analysts scrambled like rats as warnings cascaded through the chamber. "Trade network failure, hyperlane routing error. No human traffic detected. Medical supply chains interrupted." The economic heartbeat of the galaxy was flatlining. Volzar slammed his fist against the panel, sending shattered fragments of its crystalline interface scattering to the floor. "Get me the fleet, now." Across council space, the first waves of disaster struck. Asteroid mining outposts shut down. their automated systems collapsing without the human-engineered AIs that maintain them. Deep space cargo convoys, accustomed to human-built warp stabilizers, veered off course, crashing into moons, drifting into gravitational wells. Weapons platforms, relying on Terran-based circuit boards, refused to fire. Planets that had once thrived under the unspoken backbone of Earth's industry found themselves gasping for breath. And then the true horror began. Medical distress signals flooded the Council's emergency response networks. The synthetic serums used to stabilize genetic mutations in hybrid species, gone. The nanite-based regenerative injectors relied on by over 50 worlds, vanished. Across the stars, entire populations were dying in slow, agonizing waves. The once mighty Council, the unshakable force that had dictated the balance of power for millennia, was unraveling, and Earth had done it without firing a single shot. Chancellor Volzar stood before the panoramic viewport of the Council's grand spire, staring out at the darkness beyond. In the past, that darkness had been filled with human vessels, carrying goods, technology, people, a vital pulse in the galactic body. Now it was empty. The silence crawled into his bones. For the first time in his rule, for the first time in the long, arrogant history of the Council, he felt something foreign, something he had never truly known, dread. And the war hadn't even started yet. Chancellor Keth Volzar had never heard silence. This deep, it pressed into his skull like a vice, stretched out over the chamber like an unbroken shroud. The absence of human voices, once considered an irritant, now felt like an amputated limb, a phantom presence where a vital force had once been. "Report," he growled, his throat clicking from the dryness creeping into it. The Council's information hub was still flickering erratically, and the red emergency glow of the malfunctioning systems made every face in the chamber look like they were dipped in blood. A trembling officer, third-tier intelligence, barely worthy of the rank, struggled to keep his mandibles from clattering. "We've lost real-time tracking on all human vessels. Their signal beacons, security encryptions, and network relays have vanished. It's as if they never existed." Volzar's glare alone was enough to make the officer shrink. "That's impossible." "It should be," another voice muttered, a deeper one belonging to Admiral Quen Drail, the Council's highest-ranking military tactician. His silver-edged armor bore the insignia of countless battles, but for the first time in his long, brutal career, his reptilian eyes held unease instead of battle hunger. "Nothing just disappears without leaving a trail." A single keystroke echoed as Volzar pressed into his command console. The response was immediate. "Access denied. Earth network, non-existent." The words stared back at him in cold finality. "Earth played us," Volzar snarled, slamming his fist down. The impact shattered the glass console, sending shards cascading like shattered ice. He hardly noticed the sting as the edges bit into his scaled flesh. "We were watching their fleet movements, their military strength, their diplomatic alliances, but we never watched their exit plan." Drail exhaled sharply through his nostrils. "They didn't run." Volzar turned on him. "What?" "They didn't run," Drail repeated, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his ceremonial blade. "Running implies fear. This was something else. This was a withdrawal on their terms." Volzar didn't respond. He didn't have to. The room reeked of unease, the sickly tang of sweat from species that didn't even perspire, the faint metallic sharpness of stress hormones excreted by those whose evolutionary history had never known true fear. Because now, they did. The first reports arrived within the hour. It started with trade collapses. Merchant ships stalled mid-route as human-dependent systems glitched and failed. Entire economies staggered as essential goods vanished overnight. The Veilith Dominion lost 7% of its population in a single cycle when their bioregeneration vats failed. Earth-built neural stabilizers had been keeping their hybrid DNA from unraveling. The wealthy core worlds, long fattened off Terran manufacturing, faced their own catastrophe. Human-made energy cores, responsible for stabilizing over 90 interstellar stations, shorted out. One by one, habitats flickered and fell dark, and then the hospitals screamed. Across the stars, medical centers flooded Council distress channels, their messages overlapping in a rising chorus of desperation. Priority medical request human-engineered synthetic plasma reserves depleted. Emergency organ degradation in 93% of Talari patients. No alternatives exist. Gene stabilizers offline. Immediate loss of function in neural augmentation systems. Patients entering rapid degenerative failure. If emergency resupply is not acquired, over 40 million will perish within 72 hours. Do you copy? Do you? By the stars, we need silence. Volzar listened to them all. He let them play, one by one, until the chamber's acoustics rang with a chorus of civilizations gasping for air. It should have been gratifying. It wasn't. Tell me you have a solution. Drail stiffened, the lines of his battle-hardened face unreadable. The military council suggests immediate reclamation efforts, seize human colonies, confiscate their supply lines, force compliance. Volzar nearly laughed. And where will you find these colonies, Admiral? Drail hesitated. Volzar pressed the point, voice lowering into something sharper, razor-thin and lethal. Because from where I stand, it seems that Earth didn't just leave. They erased themselves. A tense ripple passed through the war table, a silent acknowledgement that nobody had an answer. Send recovery fleets, Drail commanded, pivoting toward the awaiting officers. Every known human outpost, we reclaim what we can. Now, the fleet mobilized within the hour, and within another they returned empty-handed. It wasn't just Earth, it was everything tied to them. Mars, vacant. The once bustling colonies had been wiped clean, as if someone had dragged reality itself across the surface and erased them from existence. Titan, nothing remained but empty foundations, the skeletal remains of structures picked dry. Europa, an ocean world devoid of its Terran-engineered deep-sea stations. Even the asteroid belt, once riddled with human mining operations, was silent. The machinery, gone. This wasn't evacuation, this was methodical. Sir, a trembling officer whispered, his three-fingered hands clutching a data slate. We have an anomaly report from Outpost Veskar. Spit it out, Volzar snapped. The station went dark an hour ago. No distress calls, no emergency beacons. Surveillance footage captured the last moments before complete silence. The display flickered. The footage played. A rotating orbital platform hovered above a planet, its metallic hull glinting under the system's twin suns. Then, a shift. A ripple in space, like water distorting around an unseen force. A shadow stretched across the station, though there was no source. Then, the image folded inward, a silent implosion. The feed cut to black. A single signal remained, picked up moments before transmission failure. A human voice, calm, collected, unshaken. You should have left us alone. The silence following the recording was thick enough to crush lungs. Drail's fingers flexed against the war table, his usual strategic confidence bleeding into something rawer. They aren't just gone, he muttered. They're watching. A single thought burned into Volzar's mind as he stared at the final frame of the recording, the empty black void where the station had once been. Earth wasn't just cutting ties, they were making a point, and the council was beginning to understand just how deep their mistake had gone. The silence inside the war chamber was a living thing, wrapping itself around the council's elite like a strangling vine. Chancellor Keth Volzar stood motionless, his slitted pupils fixed on the last transmission from Outpost Veskar. The screen had long gone dark, yet he could still hear the voice playing in his mind. You should have left us alone. The room was cold, but not from temperature. It was the kind of cold that seeped into bones, the kind that came when an empire realized its foundations had begun to crack. Volzar exhaled, slow and deliberate. We will find them. His words were neither question nor debate. Admiral Quen Drail, arms crossed, barely shifted from where he stood. His silence was the first sign of hesitation Volzar had ever seen in the seasoned war leader. Drail finally spoke, voice low. Find what, Chancellor? A planet that doesn't exist. A fleet that doesn't show up on any known sensors. Volzar turned, sharp as a blade being drawn. Are you suggesting we do nothing? Drail's jaw tightened. I'm suggesting we accept the possibility that we have no understanding of what we're dealing with. The tension in the room thickened, the scent of stress sweat and overheated machinery creating an undercurrent of unease. Volzar's claws tapped once against the war table. Deploy a full reconnaissance armada. I want every known human colony site scoured. Every drift station, every supply chain, every black market contact, we leave no rock unturned. Drail gave a slow nod, his gaze unreadable. And when we find nothing, Volzar's lips curled, showing too many teeth. Then we stop looking, and we start hunting. The first fleet moved within the hour, a force of reconnaissance ships designed for speed and stealth, equipped with scanning arrays that could pierce through planetary crusts. Their first destination, Mars. The once thriving colony should have been bustling with industry, its terraformed valleys stretching out under the artificial sky. Instead, the ships arrived to find a corpse. Mars was empty, not abandoned in the way of old ruins, not shattered as if war had scoured it, but stripped down to its bones. No wreckage, no infrastructure, no trace of habitation, as if every structure, every piece of machinery, every last molecule associated with humanity had been peeled away. The fleet's commanding officer, Commander Valus Jarn, stepped onto the desolate surface, boots sinking slightly into fine dust. He was the first non-human to stand on Mars in recorded history. His helmet's filters picked up only one unnatural trace, a faint magnetic disturbance, a whisper of something that had been there and was now gone. He swallowed. "Sir, his words caught. "There's nothing here, not a single damn thing." The transmission relayed back to Volzar's war chamber, but it told him nothing he didn't already expect. Next, the fleet moved to Europa, Earth's prized water world. Same result, oceans untouched, no research facilities, no deep-sea stations. Then Titan, once the fuel refinery hub of Earth's interstellar economy, bare, desolate, unmarked. Each discovery drilled the same impossible truth deeper into the Council's skull. This was not a retreat, this was something else. It happened on the fourth deployment, when a Council surveillance ship approached the asteroid belt. A small crew, nothing but scouts and analysts. Their objective scanned for residual energy readings, anything that might indicate human withdrawal patterns. Then mid-transit, their communications fell apart. Not jammed, not blocked, just gone. Their last recorded transmission was a single crew member's voice, tight with confusion. "Sir, we have a wait." "What is that?" Silence, then static, then a distortion, like metal twisting in ways it shouldn't, and then a voice, not human, not alien, something in between, observing. The ship never returned. The pattern continued. Outpost Redhaven, missing. Lunar defense arrays, gone. Arcturus 9, Earth's former deep space mining colony, a hollow shell, the only remaining structures deliberately burned beyond recognition. The entire Council fleet moved like blind men groping in the dark, chasing the ghost of a species that had erased itself with surgical thoroughness. And then they found the research station. It was on the edge of Council space, a classified installation dedicated to the study of human technological anomalies, the kind of place where scientists worked in shadowed halls, unraveling Terran innovations for the Council's gain. When Admiral Drail's forces arrived, they expected to find a derelict base. Instead, they found ruins. The station had been pulled apart, literally. Walls bent in unnatural angles, corridors stretched like something had reached into reality and kneaded them like wet clay. Whatever had happened here had left behind no bodies, no distress calls, no log recordings, just one thing. In the command center where the highest-ranking officers would have gathered, a message had been left behind, burned into the metallic walls, not in Council script, not in human language, something older, something incomprehensible, but the meaning was clear. Do not follow. Drail stood in that twisted chamber long after his officers had withdrawn, staring at the scorched words. His mind kept circling the same thought. If they didn't want us to follow, then what happens when we do? Back at the Council war chamber, the reports arrived stacked like bodies. Volzar read them all in silence. Drail, standing across from him, finally broke it. "We need to mobilize the full fleet," he said. "We make Earth show itself." Volzar didn't answer at first. Instead, he reached for the control panel and activated the Council's emergency interstellar broadcast, a direct message, not to a planet, not to a government, but to an entity. "Earth, you cannot hide. You will not be ignored." The response came almost instantly. No static, no distortion, just two words delivered in a voice that did not belong to any living human. "Keep watching." And every light in the Council chamber flickered and died. The council war chamber flickered with failing light, shadows stretching unnaturally against the curved obsidian walls. Keep watching. The message still hung in the air, unfiltered and untouched by distortion. It hadn't come from a relay station, hadn't piggybacked off any existing communication channels. It had arrived, direct, immediate, untraceable. Admiral Quen Drail's jaw clenched as he flicked his wrist, trying to pull up the security overlays. Every system was unresponsive. Across the table, Chancellor Keth Volzar's eyes narrowed, his pupils contracting into razor-thin slits. Reboot all command interfaces, Volzar ordered, his voice a sharpened edge. The nearest technician swallowed hard. Sir, the system isn't offline. His voice barely rose above a whisper. It's waiting. A ripple of unease coursed through the room. Waiting. For what? A second later, every emergency beacon across council space erupted. The reports slammed into the war table in real time, hollow displays materializing in frantic, overlapping bursts. Outpost Veskar is gone. The station didn't explode, didn't suffer a hull breach. It simply ceased to be. A council convoy en route to Caliph Prime suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Every ship drifted into the nearest sun, their navigational AI overridden. Half of the orbital defense arrays surrounding the Council's central world shut down without warning. The galaxy was unraveling. That's enough, Volzar snapped. Initiate fleet-wide war protocol. We end this. Drail turned, his stance rigid. And what exactly do you plan to end, Chancellor? Volzar's scaled lips curled back. Whatever game the Terrans are playing, I want their fleet hunted. Find Earth. Find their colonies. Make them fight us. For the first time in his career, Drail felt an unfamiliar sensation curling at the edges of his thoughts. What if that was the worst possible move? The largest fleet in Council history, mobilized within hours. 700 warships, planetary siege platforms, and Hunter-class dreadnoughts. Their target Sol system. The plan was simple. If Earth had truly disappeared, then the Council would force them back into the light. A planetary siege would bring any species to its knees. And so they arrived, slipping out of faster-than-light corridors with the weight of an executioner's blade. Except, there was nothing, not Earth, not Mars, not even the distant shape of Saturn's rings, just a hole where a solar system should be. This isn't possible, one of the bridge officers muttered, hands darting over scanning interfaces. We're in the right coordinates. This is Sol. Drail's fingers curled into a fist. He could feel it now, in the back of his skull, like a pressure pressing inward. Something was here, just not in a way they understood. Maintain formation, he ordered, forcing control back into his tone. Send out long-range pulses. If they're hiding behind interference, we'll break through it. A beat of silence. Then space folded. Not an explosion, not an impact. Something deeper. A ripple of unreality, stretching outward, like the first tremor before a planet quake. A distortion too alien for the Council's instruments to categorize. And then for the first time since arriving, the fleet detected movement, not from a planet, from above. Drail's eyes snapped to the viewport, pupils contracting. Ships, not bulky, not crude, sleek, seamless, built with an understanding of physics that defied known engineering. They moved without inertia, without drag, slipping through the void with no visible propulsion. And then, as if in silent agreement, the Terran fleet opened fire. The first Council warships vanished instantly, not vaporized, not shattered. They simply collapsed inward, pulled into nothingness. Then came the kinetic rounds, slugs fired at speeds no Council shield array could withstand. Impact sites erupted like detonations of liquid light, punching through hulls, rupturing decks, cutting through entire dreadnoughts in one pass. Return fire. The Council's counterattack erupted in full force. Plasma storms lit the black void. Torpedo arrays screamed toward their targets. Kinetic barriers were raised in desperate defense. It didn't matter. The Terran fleet shifted mid-space, blinking between locations in ways that shouldn't have been possible. One moment they were in range, the next they weren't. A single fighter asterisk dove through a Council destroyer's shield array, passing through it like water, and when it emerged on the other side, the ship itself folded inward and disappeared. A new type of war, one the Council had never fought before. They had expected a rebellion. They had walked into extinction. Chancellor Volzar watched from the war chamber, his hands clenched against the edge of the control panel. "We're losing them," a voice choked from the command tier. 70% fleet losses. "They're dismantling us." Volzar didn't hear them. He was watching the transmissions, watching his people die in ways he had no words for. Not with fire, not with conquest, with understanding. The Terrans weren't just killing the Council's forces, they were demonstrating something. A lesson. Volzar's gaze darkened. "Open a direct line." The bridge officer hesitated. "To who?" Volzar exhaled slowly. "To the humans." A moment passed, then connection established. A screen flickered to life. Not a human bridge, not a war room, just a figure standing in shadow, not lit from the front, not silhouetted, just present, watching. Volzar straightened. "Who are you?" A pause, then Volza's voice, calm, collected, unshaken. "You already know." Volzar inhaled. "Enough of this. You've made your point. You want negotiations. You have them." Silence. Then Volza's head tilted, ever so slightly. "You misunderstand." The viewport behind Volzar fractured outward in a single shockwave of distortion, splitting space apart like fragile glass. Beyond it a new light filled the chamber. Earth, but not where it should have been, not as it had been, changed, shifted, a presence vast and incomprehensible. Drail staggered back from the viewport, breath stilled in his throat. Volzar couldn't look away. For the first time in his life, he felt something alien to him. Not anger, not superiority, irrelevance. A voice came once more, soft as a closing door. "This war was never between us. You were never the enemy. You were the lesson." And then Earth was gone. Or perhaps they were. The silence left behind was not the absence of sound. It was something heavier, something that pressed into the ribs of every council leader, like the weight of a dying star. Chancellor Keth Volzar stood at the shattered viewport, his mind fighting against what his eyes refused to comprehend. The war was over. No treaties had been signed. No surrender had been declared. Earth had simply left. Or had they? He turned toward the war table, where a frozen projection of Sol System flickered like a dying flame. What once was a glowing cradle of industry, culture and defiance was now nothing but data that refused to resolve. They rewrote the laws. Admiral Quen Drail muttered from across the chamber. His voice was flat, lacking the usual hard-edged command. "They didn't fight us. They didn't win. They outgrew us." Volzar didn't respond, because deep down he knew, Drail was right. This hadn't been a war. This had been a message, a lesson etched into the bones of the galaxy, into the stars themselves, one that no species would ever forget. The first domino fell within hours. The Valeth Dominion declared a full economic crisis, their reliance on human-manufactured stabilizers leading to a collapse of their entire atmospheric infrastructure. Their ruling caste, once untouchable, was overthrown within a planetary cycle. The Caliph technocracy crumbled next. The neural networks they had woven into their civilization, built on human coding, human advancements, began to break apart. Entire cities fell dark, their digital minds now little more than empty husks. The Averan clans, a species whose entire agricultural ecosystem relied on Terran bioengineering, watched helplessly as their food sources withered, nutrients starved. Without the enzymes Earth had once provided, system by system, world by world, they all felt the consequences, not of Earth's destruction, of Earth's absence. The Great Galactic Council, once the pillar of interstellar governance, found itself in ruins not because of war, but because it had never truly understood the foundation on which its empire had rested. They had called humans primitive, yet now without them, everything was unraveling. The distress signals spread like wildfire. From military command centers to desperate trade hubs, every remaining species reached out, grasping into the void for an answer. They received only one. Across every functioning network, on every encrypted channel, a broadcast played simultaneously. There was no image, no face, just the unmistakable steady voice of Commander Dane Vol. "You misunderstood our silence. You believed absence was submission, that isolation was weakness. You never asked yourselves why we were always the ones adapting, the ones surviving, the ones surviving, the ones shaping the future while you stagnated. You thought we needed you, but now you see the truth. You were always just living in our wake. The transmission cut out, and for the first time since the Council's founding, the galaxy truly felt small. A full year passed before the first deep space recon fleet was sent to the last recorded coordinates of Earth. Their mission was to recover anything, a remnant, a signature, a breadcrumb left in the cold. They arrived to find nothing, no planetary bodies, no debris, not a solar system ripped apart by war, but a solar system that had simply never existed, as if it had been erased from the very structure of reality, or moved. The search expanded. Entire sectors were scanned, subspace ripples analyzed, energy patterns dissected. Every attempt led to the same conclusion. Earth had not been destroyed. Earth had transcended. It was no longer part of their understanding of space. They'd evolved past the Council's reach, past their comprehension, past the petty wars and shackled empires that had once held them down. They had cut their ties and left the universe in panic. Chancellor Keth Volzar sat alone in the hollowed remains of the Council's once grand chamber. The seat of galactic power was now little more than a mausoleum of irrelevance. He thought back to that final moment, to the last words Volz had spoken before everything had changed. You were the lesson. Volzar's hands tightened into fists, because now he understood, but it no longer mattered. The age of the Council had ended, and the age of humanity. No one would ever know.